Welcome into another edition of the Fantasy Authority podcast. We're coming back to you again for another Tuesday special here for the, your waiver wire ads and things that you players should be looking at. We've kind of had a pretty nasty weekend in terms of injuries. But first, before we get to all that, let me introduce you to my co-host of the evening. Once again, bring back good old Cody Kutzer. We'll be back for another week, and you can find him on Twitter at @CKutzerFF. How you doing tonight, Cody?
Doing well, man. You touched on the injury bug kind of hitting this week, but Penn State defeated Pitt, so it was always a good weekend when that happens.
I hear that. I don't want to brag too much. My Missouri Tigers whooped up on Southeast Missouri State, but as most people say, who is that? So it doesn't really matter there. But 50-0, so that was nice. But I was lucky to, at least with my fantasy teams that I have, to avoid the injury bug. I know other people weren't so lucky with some of the injuries we had this weekend. We didn't get any like major running back injury or anything like that, so we're thankful for that. We did have some major injuries this week. Starting with Big Ben, he basically played part of the first half, and then he exited due to an elbow injury, which I guess they said that had been bothering him heading into the week. Can we bring back the probable tag or something here? Their NFL, for us DFS players who play DFS, like it was very tilting to have a lot of Big Ben just to find out that he'd actually been nursing an elbow injury all week. We'd have liked to have known that because a lot of people lost a lot of money. I've seen a lot of screenshots where some people lost thousands of dollars off that. Very tilting. But and then from there, we also had Drew Brees, who I believe made contact with Aaron Donald's as he was making the pass, and he is now out 4 to 6 weeks, I believe. So people are going to be looking to stream quarterbacks. I think we should start there. If you are a Big Ben or Drew Brees owner, or maybe another quarterback that you were kind of hoping on that hasn't had a great success, is there anybody you're looking for this week that you feel like that could be a solid streaming option?
Luckily for those owners, there are a lot of quarterbacks that are still pretty widely available. What I would do is I would go and I would start looking at schedule. Just go straight streaming options. There are several options like we were talking about. You still have Jameis is still out there, pretty widely available if you want to try and go down that trail. I'm not exactly sure what to do with him, but he's a viable option. Jimmy Garoppolo seems to be getting that offense going now. I think he threw 3 touchdowns in that game. He is 49% owned across leagues. Jacoby Brissett still widely available. He threw 3 touchdowns, I believe, but only had like 146 yards. So maybe they're starting to open up things for him a little bit. Where are you looking to go at the quarterback position, Kev?
The first thing I would say is do not panic and do not go out and make a trade. Do not trade somebody, because a lot of people right now will freak out and say, oh my gosh, I just lost, Drew Brees, somebody you were kind of counting on. You probably took within your first 10 picks. This is not something I would freak out about. I think you can definitely drop Drew Brees. You don't have to hold on to him. I wouldn't hold on to him. I wouldn't be that concerned with it. I just think streaming is, such an easy thing to do. There are some leagues where, a lot of people will have drafted, maybe 1 or 2 quarterbacks or a couple quarterbacks, wait it out. People are going to start dropping their quarterbacks once bye weeks start happening. There's going to be people that are going to try to take advantage of you and try to make trades with you. Do not bite, do not trade. Unless it's something like it's a very fair trade, I wouldn't do it. But people are going to try to take advantage of you because they think that you're going to be desperate. I wouldn't do it. I do think there's a lot of options out there. There's other ones that you didn't really even mention that I think are very viable candidates. One being Andy Dalton. He has back-to-back 300-yard games. We know their defense isn't very good. They're going to have to be involved. Andy Dalton, for not having A.J. Green, which, any week now he could be back, he's done a pretty good job with John Ross, Tyler Boyd, and Tyler Eifert. This offense is going to be, as I think over the next couple of years, is going to be a pretty exciting offense. I'm not sure if Andy Dalton's going to be at the helm or not, but at this point, I think that there's a realistic upside here with him, and I think for fantasy purposes, we've seen him be a top 10 quarterback and a solid QB1. So due to positive game script and everything, I think there's a lot to like here. You look at their upcoming matchup, I don't love it next week at Buffalo, but past that, you have at Pittsburgh, Arizona, at Baltimore, Jacksonville, at LA Rams. So there's a lot of games here where they're going to have to be be aggressive and really throw the ball. So, I mean, so far over the last 2 weeks, he has thrown 93 attempts so far. And I mean, he's threw 418 in week 1 and 311 last week with, 2 touchdowns apiece in each game. So, and like I said, they're going to be getting even better once they get AJ Green back. So there's a lot to like with Andy Dalton, and he's widely available, only 19%. As of this week, he's not a great option against Buffalo. Buffalo's defense is one of the best, units in the league. But I think moving forward, he's certainly somebody you could target. Again, Matt, another one would be Matt Stafford. He's only owned in 35% of Yahoo leagues. He's been pretty solid. Week 1, he dropped 27. Last week, he had 17 and kind of a low-scoring affair with the Chargers. But if you look at their schedule, it's pretty enticing, really. So definitely some games where they're going to have to throw the ball to really stay in it. Next week, they're at Philly. Then they come back home before their bye against the Chiefs. So we know that that's going to be a game where they're going to have to air it out. Their whole, idea that they're just going to, run the ball the entire game is not going to happen. Then they go on bye. Then after the bye, they are at Green Bay, Minnesota, the Giants, at Oakland, Chicago. So, there's some real viable weeks here. I think you can start Matt Stafford moving forward in games that they're going to have to be able to throw the ball. He's been solid over the last 2 weeks. Like I said, he threw 385 and 3. He's thrown at least 2 touchdowns in both weeks. So I think there's a lot to like here with him. I think both Andy Dalton and Matt Stafford, I think, are both real options over the next couple of weeks. And I think another one very well could be available who's in a much better spot this week, and probably one that I would want to start would actually be on that opposite side of that Andy Dalton, would be Josh Allen. He hasn't been fantastic, but he's certainly been good enough the last 2 weeks, 18 and then 22 each of the, in the last 2 weeks. We know he has that rushing upside there. He is facing a Giants team that's given up the the Cincinnati Bengals, who this week, and I think that's certainly a matchups that we like. Then after that, they play New England and at Tennessee. But at least for this 1 week, I really like Josh Allen, and I think what he can bring to the table. Other than that, I guess if you wanted to take a shot on a Mason Rudolph, who has chemistry with some of the players there, who didn't look awful. Threw for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. They play at San Francisco this week and then Cincinnati. So he's not a terrible option if you're kind of desperate in a deeper format. But I wouldn't obviously go out of my way to add him. But he's certainly somebody that's there, and I think is a viable candidate. And then after that, Derek Carr is probably available, but I wouldn't mess with him, especially going to Minnesota. I don't like that matchup. So for me, I think for me it'd be Josh Allen as number 1, and then a little bit long-term options, or looking ahead to next week, would be like a Matt Stafford.
Yeah, and then just touching on Jacoby Brissett's schedule coming up, he has Atlanta, Oakland, and then at Kansas City week 5. So might be able to see him put up some better numbers in those games as well.
All right, so let's keep it moving. We promised ourselves 20 minutes. We're already 10 minutes in. Here we are. It's like we always do. So let's keep it moving. Let's move over to the running back position. Again, not a great week for this position. I think there's better options this week than there were last week after a couple of injuries. I really thought Jalen Samuels would be probably the top waiver out of the week, but we find out that the injury to James Conner isn't as serious. And actually, speaking of the Steelers, even though it looks like, unless Mason Rudolph really takes a big step forward this year, it's hard to believe that the Steelers are even going to win this division or even make the playoffs at this point without Big Ben. I will say this, that they did today, they actually, breaking news, just traded a first-round pick for Mika Fitzpatrick to the Dolphins. So I don't know. That seems like a pretty crazy, especially if things go real sideways like they look like. That could be a pretty high pick that they're giving. It could end up being a top 15, 20 round, top 20 pick for a player who, no, I get it. He's still very young. He's versatile. There's a lot about Mika Fitzpatrick I like, but a team that likely isn't going to make the playoffs, it just seems like a really risky move to give a first round pick.
I didn't understand that when I saw Jason Lockenfor's tweet earlier about the Steelers being one of the teams in the running. I was like, well, they're not going to give up a first. That doesn't really make sense. And here we are. I don't really get it, but that secondary is bad enough that they could use a player like Minka, obviously. Like you said, if this goes real south and that ends up being a top 5, top 10 pick, they could have used that on, I don't think Rudolph is the answer. So they can land at somebody like Herbert or Tua, one of those guys, but we got to get back on track here.
No, for sure. So anyways, with James Conner, like I said, it looks like that he is going to be okay. We'll have to wait and see how he does this week. There's still a chance that I guess he could miss this week, but Jalen Samuels is certainly a viable option. I think, after that, you have Raheem Mostert, who, had a really big week this week. 22 fantasy points, had 13 carries for 83 yards. He's also utilized in the passing game as well. three or four passes for 68 yards and a touchdown. Big game for him. And with Tevin Coleman sideline, like I think there's a lot to like here. It really looks like Matt Breida is definitely the early down back, but it was weird because it was like Matt Breida, they pulled him off the field, in short yardage situation, and it was either Mossert or Jeff Wilson who got the goal line carries there. So I mean that was very tilting if you own Matt Breida, because it was like he was just in between the 20s and 20s guy, and Matt Breida had a solid game. But I mean, that is certainly something to monitor moving forward. Is if he's not going to be getting the goal line work. Mossert, I think, is definitely somebody who I would be targeting, especially in PPR formats. From there, Carlos Hyde just doesn't want to die. This past week, I mean, he had 20 attempts, 90 yards. I mean, didn't look terrible. It wasn't awful, and I wouldn't go out of my way to add him. I don't think he's ever going to be utilized as a pass catcher. I don't know. I mean, on a Texans offense that's going to be much more explosive than they were last week. I mean, they barely won 13-12, but I think on most weeks they're going to be an offense that's going to have to pass the ball, especially with their schedule. It's really going to depend on game script on how effective Carlos Hyde is. I don't think I would ever feel comfortable, maybe as like a bye week fill-in or something like that. But like I wouldn't go out of my way of adding Carlos Hyde. I don't know where you stand on that, but then a couple other ones. Chris Thompson is certainly going to be a guy who is, especially when they're going to be playing from behind a lot, I think he makes some sense if he can stay healthy. There's a few other ones that I think are more, Devin Singletary got hurt. Doesn't sound like it's super serious, but definitely is going to miss some time. So now you have the old man. I mean, speaking of guys that won't die, Frank Gore just lives on. I mean, this man is just, I don't even know. Like, he should be selling something because, I mean, he's 36 now, and he is still in the league, and now is looking square down the barrel of the starting running back for the Buffalo Bills. And I think you see TJ Yeldon play quite a bit as well as more of the pass catching back, gains a bigger role in that offense. So, who are you targeting at running back position this week?
Yeah, you already touched on Chris Thompson a little bit, but he's only 48% owned. Like you said, they're looking like they're going to be playing from behind a lot. So particularly in your PPR leagues, you want to add him. I think right now he's already leading Washington in target. Gio Bernard, only 41% owned. I didn't get to see this game at all, but just doing a little hashtag box score scouting, didn't really seem like Mixon got going in that game at all. And I know they got blown out. So maybe, I'm not sure if he was pulled out prematurely just based on that, since he probably wasn't 100% healthy, but I still think Gio should be owned. And then, Kev, what's going on with the KC running backs? Is Darwin Thompson worth an ad this week?
He is. Right now, I mean, both of them are kind of banged up. LaShawn McCoy, Damian Williams. I don't think either one of them are going to be something that's serious, something that I would overly worry about. I don't know. Like, LaShawn McCoy, his first week looked pretty good. Last week, I mean, he cost the Chiefs a 74-yard touchdown. That is so tilting. I was tilting my face off because after that happened, I was like, oh my gosh, because I had so much Mecole Hardman in daily fantasy, and I was so angry. I didn't even look because I didn't want to know how big of a swing that was for me, because like I had him everywhere. I know on the afternoon only slate, like I had like the nuts play with Mecole Hardman in there, and like I don't want to know what would have happened had that happened. So regardless, LaShawn McCoy is definitely dealing with an injury. And so is Damian Williams, but neither one of them seem to be something too serious. I think they basically said after the game that like they're not. Well, basically Andy Reid said we'll see, but we don't think it's anything serious on either one of them. But I do think he's still worth owning in leagues. It really depends on how many bench spots you have, and that's what all of this really matters. If you only have 5 bench spots, like you have to really be smart on the players you add. Like I wouldn't be just running out there to add, because I don't think, at least among the running backs right now, I don't think there's anybody right now that you can add that's going to make an immediate impact on your roster right now. So it really is going to depend on what your bench looks like. And I mean, I see a lot of people who will have 5 or 6 bench spots, or only have 5 bench spots, but then they have like a quarterback or 2. And I'm like, what are you doing, guys? Like, this isn't how you should be, utilizing your roster. You don't need those guys. Drop that second quarterback or trade them or whatever you can do and get rid of those extra positions, because you should be rostering nothing but running backs and wide receivers. So for me, like I said, I think Darwin Thompson is up. He's not someone I'm going to go out and spend like a high waiver ad to, a high waiver priority ad, or heavy fab. I may drop 1 or 2% of my fab budget or something on them, on a Darwin Thompson, because I do think, because to be honest with you, neither one of them have looked overly impressive like anything that's like, oh man, like these guys look really good. I know it was just 1 week, or we've only had 2 weeks right now, but I do think Darwin Thompson eventually this season could start to get more run. But as things stand currently, unless we get another injury, like he's just more of a bench stash to me. Along guys like with Chase Edmonds, I definitely think we got a scare from David Johnson, who left the game for a few drives due to a wrist injury. So but I think definitely Chase Edmonds is somebody that I would want to have on my roster. Rex Burkhead continues to get work, and that Mark Ingram left with an injury as well. We'll have to see how that shakes out. Right now we have the Kenyon Drake possible trade that's kind of rumors have been kind of running around. And at this point, I don't know if you can really say that they're not true. I mean, the Dolphins are just unloading anybody and everybody who has options. I'm kind of hoping the Chiefs go after Xavier Howard, but that's another conversation for another day. But I mean, I'll tell you what, Kalen Ballage, awful against the Patriots. I mean, he had multiple opportunities to catch patches, a couple of them that maybe he could have picked up big yardage from, and did nothing with them. I mean, really, so far, all the hype has not been warranted, because he just looks awful right now, completely lost. I don't know what he's doing, and then, I think the other one that's really interesting right now would be Rashad Penny. A lot of people dropped him after, not really being all that involved, and Chris Carson, hype season, all off season. Chris Carson right now did not look very good his last game. He has 2 fumbles, on the season. If this continues to happen, Rashad Penny really looked pretty good this last week, 10 carries, 62 yards, and a touchdown. He's somebody that he's owned in 60%. I know a lot of teams aren't. He's even somebody that I would try to buy on right now if you could possibly get him, depending on, maybe you're a team that does have 2 quarterbacks, and you drafted well, and you drafted, Carson Wentz and Lamar Jackson. You try to move, Carson Wentz or something like that, or whatever, in a kind of a package deal, to get somebody like Rashad Penny is something as a way that I would go.
Yeah, then you can also look at somebody like Alexander Madison. If you're playing the injury card, because they are running the ball a lot in Minnesota. So he might be a preemptive ad if, like you were saying before, if you have the roster space. You're not going to pick up Madison if you only have 4 or 5 bench spots. But if you have maybe a little bit of a deeper bench, Madison's only owned in 22% of leagues. So you can give someone like him a look.
Oh, I like that call too. I think that's a really good call, especially with Dalvin Cook's injury history. Like, he's somebody that I would certainly have interest in. The other one would be Justin Jackson. I was shocked to see that Justin Jackson Yahoo Leagues only owned in 33% of leagues. Like, that would shock me. I felt like that would have been much higher. He's getting work. I mean, he's been very efficient in the work that he's been given. Last week 1, he had 6 carries, 57 yards, 7 attempts last week for 59 yards. Like, he's looked pretty good anytime he's been given an opportunity. The problem is Austin Eckler has been just as good. Now, I still think that Justin Jackson is at least worth the spot on your roster, because if anything happened to him, and we have to remember, Melvin Gordon, a lot of people think that Melvin Gordon has to be back by week 8. He does not. Like, he has to be back. He has to be back by 30 days left in the season. So basically, I mean, he can sit out actually until I think week 13, I believe, or week 14, something like that, until he can be back. And at that point, I don't even know if the Chargers bring him back. Like, is there even a point of bringing him back at that point if both of them are there? Or depending on how things go. So I definitely think Justin Jackson should be on more people's radars. I was surprised to see that he's available in that amount of leagues. But I think that's pretty much the running backs that we want to hit. Maybe Ito Smith. I forgot to mention him. But he looks really good. He looked really good last night. He was getting opportunities on the goal line and stuff like that. So I definitely think that's another player, especially with Devonta Freeman, who has not been good so far through the first 2 weeks. But other than that, let's move on to wide receivers and kind of keep this thing moving. There's a lot of the same guys from last week. We can definitely talk about Demarcus Robinson, explosion week, where he went out and just 170 yards and 2 touchdowns, dominated the Raiders. McCole Hardman, like I said, I mean, he had a really good game too. 4 catches, 61 yards and a touchdown, but don't forget that he had a 74-yard touchdown wiped away from LaShawn McCoy's hold. So, I mean, he had potential to be so much more than what he was. Demarcus Robinson outsnapped him this week. We'll talk about those two, but I think, you still have Terry McLaurin, which I don't know why he's still available. the thing with him is the opportunities there. Like the targets aren't going away. He's had 7 and 9 targets the last 2 weeks, 5 catches, 125, five catches, 62 yards and a touchdown this week. Like they're always going to be behind. They're going to have to throw the ball. He's definitely their number one target. Like he needs to be owned. Like he's somebody too that I would try to go out and try to buy, depending on what you could get for him as well. Because I think, especially if you're in like a keeper league, like I like the long term look of what Terry McLaurin could be. I mean, he's big or not. I mean, he's got the right size. I think he's 6'1", ran that 4.3. Looks like he's getting better as a route runner. So like, there's a lot to like in his profile. So he's somebody that I would definitely be targeting. And then you have DK Metcalf. DJ Shark, who, again, I'm really surprised how widely. I mean, after that big week he had against the Chiefs, I don't know if people thought that was a fluke, but last week he had 9 targets, 7 receptions, 55 yards, and a touchdown. Not as big of a day, but still that 9 targets, something I want to see from a wide receiver. So I think him and Chris Conley are both viable options that you can add. Deebo Samuel looks like he might be the best wide receiver in that offense right now. Dante Pettis is a thing of the past right now. It was more of a hype, fantasy Twitter hype guy more than anything. Deebo Samuel, seven targets, 5 receptions, 87 yards, and a touchdown against the Bengals. Has a decent matchup this week against Pittsburgh before they go on bye. But I like Deebo Samuel, more of a slot guy. But I definitely think that he might be the best wide receiver in that offense right now. Not named George Kittle, but right now, I mean, it's hard not to. I think those guys would probably be my top guys out. Is there anybody? Who are you looking at this week?
The news out of Pittsburgh. I'll be looking at James Washington. For those who don't know, Mason Rudolph and James Washington were once college teammates. Set a bunch of records down there at Oklahoma State. Dante Moncrief was responsible for the pick that shows up on Mason Rudolph's stat line. Just went right through his hands and into the hands of a defender. So I think that might be the last we see of Dante Moncrief in any kind of large capacity outside of like an injury or something. So James Washington, who's only sitting at 29% owned. I think you touched on the bigger guys. If you're looking at some deeper leagues, somebody like Devin Smith with the news of Michael Gallup going to be out for 2 to 4 weeks, for around a month for the thing like trimming his meniscus, I believe was what was going on. And then there are several injuries with Philadelphia. So if you need to, kind of just throw a hope and a prayer, Nelson Aguilar, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, and in deeper leagues, Mac Hollins, because I think he makes the most sense as the field stretcher there if Deshaun Jackson's going to miss a bunch of time.
Yeah, I know. I agree with that. I think both those are smart calls, especially in deeper leagues. I guess we'll talk real quick about Demarcus Robinson and McCall Hardman. I was so surprised that last week Demarcus Robinson and McCall Hardman weren't bigger ads last week. Maybe they should have been the top ads last week. I mean, we're talking about the best offense in the league with the best quarterback in the league. One of them definitely should have. You should have. They should be widely owned right now, and they're not. And it's surprising. And now here we are. Demarcus Robinson is 7% owned right now, 7%, and then Hardman is 40% owned. So both of these guys are widely available. I think that if you had to nail me down for a player that I want to take, it's going to be tough because I do think that this isn't what I would expect every week, obviously, from Demarcus Robinson. But I feel like that I think these guys could go either week. So next week, I could see McCall Hardman have a big game. And then the week after that, it could be Demarcus Robinson. I don't know if there's one of them that I think on a weekly basis is going to give you a solid floor. But I do think that I think McCall Hardman has the higher ceiling despite the big game Demarcus Robinson has. Demarcus Robinson was definitely slept on last week, and nobody really even talked about him as being an option, which was silly because I will say this, the one thing with Demarcus Robinson is that his chemistry with Patrick Mahomes is real. Like going all the way back to his first year here in preseason, they've always had a really strong chemistry, and we saw his ball skills where he went up and made a couple, beautiful catches and contested catches situations. So there's certainly something there for Demarcus Robinson. I just don't know if I would count on it every week. We know Tyreek Hill is likely going to miss at least another probably 3 to 4 weeks, and so next week they have Baltimore, then they have at Detroit, Indy, at home against Houston, at Denver, and then Green Bay. And then I was assuming that Tyreek will be back by then. But regardless, I definitely think one of these two are probably the top waiver ads of the week. Is the ones that I would want just because of their upside, but understand that they're also limited because Tyreek Hill is coming back. So if you're looking more of a deep, all season play, I think Terry McLaurin is definitely the one that I would want the most out of all these guys available. But if you're looking, just for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I definitely think Hardman or Robinson are more intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget, you got to win these weeks to get to the playoffs. So, you might just have to forego the longer term play and just go upside with the Kansas City receivers.
For sure, for sure. And you never know. I mean, maybe Tyreek sits out a little bit longer because the way the depending on what the Chiefs look like. Okay, so let's move on to tight end. Tight end is definitely kind of a dumpster fire this week. There's not a lot to talk about here. Most of the guys that you really want to add, like a Darren Waller, which I felt like we really talked about a lot the last couple of weeks. Like everyone should have known this was coming. We talked about it a ton. A ton as a player who was really standing out in camp. So definitely Darren Waller, somebody that everyone should have known this was coming, especially once Antonio Brown was traded. So, but he's gone. Mark Andrews, another player that we've really talked up this offseason, has really played very, very well each of the first 2 weeks. But like I said, those guys are gone. So I think if Vernon Davis is an option, maybe Jordan Reed, because a lot of people probably have dropped him. But Jordan Reed could come back at any time. So, if he doesn't, Vernon Davis, I think, is at least worth a look. In this offense. I mean, week 1, he had that he had that long touchdown, but I mean, he had 7 targets week 1, 4 catches, 59 yards and a touchdown. Last week, he had 4 targets, 3 catches, 29 yards. Not that exciting, but let's be honest. If your tight end gets you 5 to 10 points, 10 points, you're thrilled. Like, oh, awesome week, boys. Awesome week at tight end. Unless you had, George Kittle or Travis Kelce or something like that, or even Zach Ertz, something like that, you're expecting more from. But, any of these other guys, like, you have a week like that. So for me, like, I would probably be more interested in adding like a Will Dissly, or adding, stashing away a Chris Herndon, who will be back in a few more weeks, and hopefully by then, they get their offense back, which, they lost half their team in 1 week there, with, we didn't really talk. Actually, that's another one we didn't talk about with Sam Darnold coming down with mono. That can be a kind of a long-term deal. I think he'll probably at least miss a few weeks. So who knows on that one. But for me, like, Trey Burton is available. I don't know. I mean, that offense looks so bad right now. I don't know what's going on with Mitchell Trubisky. He looks bottom of the barrel bad. Like, maybe they should look at Chase Daniel as an option right now. And it's such a shame because that offense could be so much better with Allen Robinson and Trey Burton and, Taylor Gabriel and Anthony Miller. And, like, they have so many weapons on the offense. Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery. Like, this team should be so much better. They shouldn't be going down to the last second of a game to win against, the Denver Broncos 16-14. Like, this offense has been anemic. They need to figure something out and fast because this team is way too good to be this bad. I don't know. Maybe this Monday Night Football game at Washington will be the game that kind of jumpstart their offense because they need it. But, like I said, for me, it would be probably looking at adding a Chris Herndon and then just like playing matchups. Like I said, Tyler Eifert's an option. Is always an option in this offense. And then, like I said, Jimmy Graham would be another one, especially against Denver. Denver always struggles against tight ends this week, and now the Packers are playing Denver. And then, like I said, the other one would be Will Dissly. I think is somewhat intriguing.
At this point, you're just looking for a hope and a prayer. Like you said, if you get 8 to 10 points from your tight end, you're thrilled for the week. Somebody you might want to look at, Noah Fant. He hasn't done much, but he has had 4 targets in each of his first 2 games. With that team as bad as it is, maybe he sees more volume come his way. Gerald Everett, Tyler Higbee went out with, I think it was like a chest injury or some kind of upper body contusion. He's day-to-day. But if he were to miss this week, you might look at Gerald Everett. That team can always look to them to go off for 4 or 5 touchdowns each week. Tyler Eifert, he's only 9% owned. You touched on him a little bit, but with Andy Dalton out there, can you believe Andy Dalton is second in the NFL in passing yards right now? Like if you would have told me going into this year that, hey, 2 weeks in, Andy Dalton is going to be behind only Pat Mahomes for passing yards, I really don't know how I would have reacted to you. But you said it, man. Tight end is a dumpster fire. Like the fact that Rob Gronkowski is still 20% owned in leagues, that tells you just how bad.
It really is, and like we've seen some other players, like OJ Howard hasn't really done anything yet. I mean, there's some other players. Hunter Henry went down with an injury already, and he's going to miss possibly the entire season, depending on how this whole thing shakes out. But yeah, I mean, the tight end position is always ugly. I've been thrilled with the output I've gotten from Austin Hooper in a lot of leagues. But I'll tell you what, I mean, the Cincinnati thing doesn't really surprise me all that much. Like, they were an offense that I kind of talked about a lot over the offseason that I felt like was going to be in such a better situation with Zach Taylor, a forward-thinking, progressive coach. So, like, I'm not, like, it didn't really shock me all that much. But yeah, so for me, okay, so let's wrap this up, put a bow on it. We're at 30 minutes. Son of a, we tried, but we're getting better. We're making progress. So, anyways, real quickly, if you had a top waiver ad, or fab, would you spend a large amount of fab or a top waiver ad on anybody this week, or would you just keep riding it out?
I'd probably just, because there are a lot of decent options, I'd probably just try and get a couple of guys on the cheap. I mean, I really don't see anyone like I'd really love to go out and, spend all my fab on, or if I had the top waiver priority. But the two guys out of Washington are at least interesting just because of the opportunity they're going to see. A lower one, James Washington, just because of the fall of Dante Moncrief and the rise of Mason Rudolph here. But I mean, there's really not, obviously the KC guys, looking that way, with Hardman only being 40% owned and DeMarcus is only 7%. But there's really not anyone that I'm really rushing, and I would tell everybody and all of our listeners to go out there and grab right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't think that there's anybody that's like, I mean, I think there's players that I want to stash, but not somebody that I'm going to spend like a top waiver priority for, or somebody I'm going to spend a large amount of my fab for. I mean, you'd have to be pretty desperate at like wide receiver to spend a lot towards, or, a top waiver ad for Terry McLaurin. I do really like him. I think that his ceiling is decently high, but not as high as what you'd probably think, especially in that offense. Like, I think it certainly is capped. But for a rookie wide receiver, I like. But in redraft, I think these things can, go a certain way very quickly. But I don't think that I would. Like, if I had, the number one waiver priority, that waiver stays the same until you use it, I would wait as long as I possibly could, because we're going to get some big injuries. Something's going to happen where there's going to be a monster waiver week, where there's a monster, just big fish, league-winning type of play, and that's what I would be saving it for. If you're up there, sure. If you're down at the bottom, and I would keep probably spending, and keep trying to cycle some stuff out and stuff like that. So, like I said, like I don't think there's anybody this week that just like blows my socks off that I'm like, whew, I got to get my hands on that one. Because even the Demarcus Robinsons or Mecole Hardmans, they are certainly limited and capped for upside only for a few more weeks until Tyreek comes back. So, yeah, I think we're both on the same page there. So, with that being said, let's wrap this thing up, because, we said we were going to try to get through this thing quickly. Like I said, my name's Kevin Steele. You can find me on Twitter at FantasyWrath13. You can find Cody on Twitter at CKutzerFF. Be sure to check out our waiver ad. You'll find it in the link. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'll have that in the links down below. Please give us a like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Share it. Do whatever you got to do. We really appreciate it. If you want to join the community, the TFA community, we have a Slack chat that's going on. It's 100% free. A lot of people may not be familiar with what Slack is. It's like a chat room, basically, like the AOL days, but a little bit cleaner, a little bit, you can share GIFs and everything else. But, there's a lot of people in there. I think we have over 200 people in there, to talk fantasy football with. You have a question, you have a trade, you want to set your lineups, or who we add, some things maybe change over today and tomorrow, before, everything locks. You want to get with us. We're always here. We're always here to help. So, if you're into DFS, we have a chat that's pretty lit there too. We do a good job with keeping up with news and, talking about plays there. So, be sure to, like I said, follow us on Twitter, like, subscribe, rate and review on your favorite podcast app. We really appreciate it. And we will see you again on Wednesday when we are back again for a live show with our new co-host, Jen Smith. We're really excited to have her on. So we'll bring the fire. So again, get at us on Twitter or get at us on Slack. Have a great week, and let's get week number 3. We out.